What if the most dangerous moment at sea is when a captain believes everything is still under control? 3 experienced captains, 3 ships with working equipment, 3 decisions that felt careful and responsible. Instead, they killed over 1,100 people in fog. This is why sailors fear the fog. 5:30 a.m., February 22nd, 1901. A passenger ship glides through the Golden Gate in fog, so thick the people on shore have no idea a disaster is unfolding a few hundred yards away. 10 minutes later, ship is gone. 128 dead. The deadliest shipwreck in Golden Gate history happened because the crew couldn't see what was directly in front of them. The city of Rio de Janeiro had crossed the Pacific from Hong Kong, Yokohama, Honolulu, then the final push to San Francisco. Some passengers were returning home. Others were seeing America for the first time. Most were asleep. When the ship reached the entrance to the Golden Gate on February 21st, heavy fog smothered the channel. Captain William Ward didn't enter. He anchored outside and waited. Hours passed. Before sunrise, the fog still hadn't lifted. At 4 a.m., Ward and local pilot Frederick Jordan decided to push through. There was no Golden Gate Bridge in 1901, no illuminated structure, no GPS, no radar. The bridge team had charts, a compass, depth soundings, knowledge of local currents. What they didn't have was a clear view of the coastline. Below deck, passengers stayed in their cabins. No alarm, no order to prepare lifeboats. Then the hull struck rock near Fort Point. The impact opened the ship below the waterline. For a moment, the damaged section stayed pressed against the rocks. Then the outgoing tide pulled the vessel away. Water rushed inside. You wait to a jolt. You wait for an order. You put on shoes. By the time you reach for the door, the corridor is waist-deep. Furniture crashes into walls. Doors won't open. People in nightclothes stumble into passageways, filling with seawater. Many of the Chinese and Japanese passengers were housed on lower decks, farther from open air, closer to the flooding. The crew attempted to launch lifeboats. They didn't have enough time. The city of Rio de Janeiro sank in less than 10 minutes. 210 people aboard. 82 survived. 128 dead near the entrance to San Francisco Bay. Outside, fishermen heard the distress and moved toward the wreck. Some survivors were pulled from floating wreckage. Others were carried away by the current before help could reach them. Captain Ward died with the ship. Pilot Jordan survived. The later proceedings didn't reveal an unknown reef or a possible mechanical failure. The rocks were charted. The fog had already been severe enough to stop the ship the night before. Why did the vessel begin moving again before the bridge team could confirm its position? Ward and Jordan were experienced. They'd crossed the Pacific safely. They'd waited outside the harbor. They were close enough to San Francisco that continuing felt reasonable. The city of Rio de Janeiro disappeared so quickly that people on shore didn't see the disaster. They saw survivors and wreckage afterward. Rescue boats moving through the fog. They didn't watch the ship strike. For decades, the wreck remained difficult to map. More than a century later, sonar finally revealed the broken remains on the seabed. Hull collapsed, partly buried beneath sediment. The first disaster happened because a ship lost the coastline. The second happened because 2 ships lost each other, even though they could hear one another the entire time. May 28, 1914. The Empress of Ireland leaves Quebec City for Liverpool. 1,477 passengers and crew aboard. The ship moves down the St. Lawrence as families settle in. Ahead, the Norwegian coal carrier Storstad cuts through the dark in the opposite direction. After midnight, the river pilot left the vessel near Point Au Pair. Captain Henry Kendall continued downstream. At first, both ships were visible. Their bridge teams could see one another's lights and estimate how the vessels would pass. Then fog rolled across the river. The lights disappeared. Captain Kendall stopped the engines and ordered them full astern. 3 short whistle blasts announced his engines were reversing. Storstad answered. The ships could still hear each other. The sound in the fog is a lie. A whistle tells you a ship is there, not its angle, its speed, or its intent. Both crews were working from a ghost image of the river. Kendall believed Storstad would pass safely. The officers aboard Storstad believed the Empress was positioned somewhere else. They heard signals from one another. Each side interpreted those signals through a different picture of the river. Then Storstad appeared through the fog, not passing ahead, but approaching the starboard side of the Empress of Ireland, too close for a normal course change. Kendall shouted for the coal carrier to reverse. He ordered his own engines and helm in an attempt to avoid the collision. No room left. Storstad's bow struck the passenger liner amidships. The impact tore a large opening into the hull. For a moment, the coal carrier remained embedded in the side of the Empress. Kendall wanted the ships to stay together. The bow of Storstad was partly blocking the hole, but the current and the movement of both vessels pulled them apart. The moment Storstad came free, water poured through the damaged side. The Empress of Ireland began leaning to starboard. The list was immediate and severe. Cabins tilted beneath sleeping passengers. Furniture slid across floors. Doors jammed. Some climbed toward the upper deck. Others moved in the wrong direction because the angle made the interior impossible to read. Open portholes that had been safely above the river moved closer to the surface. Water entered through them as the liner rolled. The crew tried to launch the lifeboats. The list turned them into dead weight. One side pinned against the hull. The other swung uselessly out of reach. Passengers reached the boat deck and found that the equipment meant to save them could no longer be lowered. The Empress of Ireland sank in 14 minutes. 1,012 people died. 465 survived. Many passengers were still wearing night clothes when they entered the river. Some escaped through portholes. Some climbed onto the exposed side of the hull. Others jumped from the deck before the ship disappeared beneath them. Hundreds never reached open air. When the liner went down, survivors were left in cold water, surrounded by wreckage. Storstad remained afloat despite major damage to her bow. Her crew lowered boats and pulled people from the river. Other vessels arrived from shore. Captain Kendall survived. After being pulled from the water, he continued helping with the rescue. The official inquiry began within days. Both bridge teams gave different accounts. Each side described positions, whistle signals, and course changes that placed responsibility on the other vessel. The inquiry eventually blamed Storstad's chief officer for altering course and failing to call the captain as the situation became more dangerous. But the testimony revealed why the collision had been possible. The ships weren't silent. They were signaling. The crews weren't unaware of one another. They knew another vessel was close. The failure was that both bridges believed they understood where it was. Every new whistle was fitted into an earlier assumption. Neither crew received a clear visual correction until Storstad was too close to avoid. The Empress of Ireland became the deadliest maritime disaster in Canadian peacetime history. Yet outside Canada, the ship never became as widely known as the Titanic. 2 months later, the First World War began. Public attention moved elsewhere. The wreck remained in the St. Lawrence. The inquiry preserved the conflicting testimony, and the loss of 1,012 people became a warning about how quickly a familiar route could become impossible to read. By the middle of the 20th century, radar was supposed to solve both problems. It could detect land. It could detect ships. It could measure distance through darkness and fog. In July 1956, 2 major passenger liners approached each other south of Nantucket. Both had radar. Both detected the other vessel before visual contact. The ships still collided. 11:10 p.m. July 25, 1956. The Italian liner Andrea Doria was approaching New York, near the end of a transatlantic crossing. Roughly 1,700 passengers and crew aboard. Traveling east from New York was the Swedish liner Stockholm. Fog covered the shipping route south of Nantucket. Both ships had modern radar. Both detected a target before they saw the vessel itself. Radar in 1956 showed a vessel as a small point of light. A bearing, a range, and a guess. Officers needed repeated observations to plot the movement accurately. The bridge team aboard Andrea Doria believed Stockholm would pass on one side. The officer aboard Stockholm believed the Italian liner would pass on the other. The two ships didn't establish a clear passing agreement by radio. They continued closing. At their combined speed, 1 nautical mile disappeared in roughly 90 seconds. Then the fog opened. Stockholm appeared off the starboard side of Andrea Doria, far closer than the Italian officers expected. Both bridges reacted. Andrea Doria turned to port. Stockholm turned to starboard. The maneuvers brought Stockholm's reinforced bow into the side of the Italian liner. The collision ripped through passenger cabins. Steel walls folded inward. People sleeping near the impact point were killed instantly. 14-year-old Linda Morgan had been asleep in a cabin with her family when Stockholm's bow tore into the ship. The impact carried her out of Andrea Doria and left her on the damaged bow of Stockholm. Members of the Swedish crew heard her calling for her mother and found her alive. She'd been moved from one ship to the other during the collision without falling into the sea. Her younger half-sister didn't survive. When the ships separated, water rushed into the damaged starboard side of Andrea Doria. The liner developed a severe list. She remained afloat. That gave the passengers time. But the angle created a new problem. Only the lifeboats on the starboard side could be launched. The portside boats hung too high above the water. Half the ship's lifeboat capacity was unavailable. Passengers climbed to the upper decks and saw the ship leaning hard. One side of the deck was close to the water. The other rose above it. The boats they'd been told would carry them to safety were still attached to the ship, but many could no longer reach the sea. The crew transmitted distress calls. Stockholm had suffered heavy damage to her bow, and 5 members of her crew had been killed. But the Swedish liner remained afloat. Her crew began launching boats. Other ships heard the distress message. The cargo ship Cape and changed course. The transport private William H. Thomas moved toward the collision site. But the largest source of rescue boats was already traveling away. The French liner Isle de France had passed the area and was continuing east. Her captain, Raoul de Bodin, received the emergency call and turned back, taking another passenger liner into fog and darkness toward 2 damaged ships, small rescue boats, and people in the water. Isle de France arrived with her exterior lights blazing. Before her arrival, lifeboats disappeared into darkness after leaving the damaged ship. Now the passengers could see where those boats were going, a large, upright liner with more boats and room for hundreds of people. Isle de France launched 13 lifeboats. Her crew began ferrying passengers away from Andrea Doria. By morning, the French liner had taken aboard 753 survivors. Cape and Private William H. Thomas, Stockholm, and other ships rescued hundreds more. Around 1,660 people survived. 51 people died across the 2 ships. The collision had made half of Andrea Doria's lifeboats unusable. The responding vessels replaced that missing capacity. But the Italian liner wasn't recovering. The fog began to lift. Daylight revealed the ship leaning farther toward the sea. The passengers were safe. The liner had only a few hours left. By the morning of July 26th, Andrea Doria was empty. Aircraft circled overhead. Rescue vessels remained nearby. Cameras recorded the final stage. The fog that had hidden the collision was gone. The damage was now visible. The starboard side sank lower. Decks that had carried passengers only hours earlier tilted into the water. Windows disappeared. Railings went under. The list continued until the ship rolled onto her side. At around 10 a.m., Andrea Doria sank. Stockholm survived, despite losing much of her bow. The Swedish liner eventually reached New York under her own power. The 2 shipping companies settled their claims out of court. Arguments continued over speed, radar plotting, passing arrangements, and the final turns. But one fact remained unchanged. Both ships had detected each other before the collision. The radar worked. The bridge teams interpreted the contact differently. The city of Rio de Janeiro couldn't see the coastline clearly enough to confirm its position. The Empress of Ireland and Storstad lost sight of each other and continued from different assumptions. Andrea Doria and Stockholm could see radar contacts, but they disagreed about what those contacts meant. The common failure happened before the impact. The city of Rio de Janeiro had already waited outside the Golden Gate. Later, the captain and pilot believed the approach could be completed safely. The Empress of Ireland and Storstad had already seen each other. When fog removed the lights, both bridge teams continued using the picture they'd formed moments earlier. Andrea Doria and Stockholm had radar targets on their screens. Both knew another vessel was approaching. Neither established a shared passing plan before the distance became critical. The people below deck, asleep in their cabins, eating dinner, packing their bags. They didn't know any of this. They learned the bridge was wrong when the ship struck, when the corridor tilted, when water started pouring through the door. By then, navigation was over. Survival had begun. At the Golden Gate, 128 people died near a city hidden behind fog. On the St. Lawrence, 1,012 people died after 2 ships lost visual contact. South of Nantucket, 51 people died despite working radar. A captain can know the harbor. A bridge can hear the other vessel. Radar can display the target, and the ship can still be moving toward a collision. Fog doesn't need to hide the danger completely. It only needs to hide the detail that proves the bridge is wrong. These disasters didn't happen because the captains were reckless. They happened because they believed they still understood the situation, right until the moment they didn't. If you want more stories about how experienced crews can still lose everything in plain sight, subscribe and turn on notifications. Next time we're covering a disappearance where the ship was found, but what actually happened to the people aboard still doesn't make sense. Drop a real shipwreck or maritime mystery in the comments. I'll pick the strongest one and prove it with the records.